The knock on Nora Wren's door was barely a scrape, but it was enough to break the solitude of her ranch. When she opened it, a man collapsed at her feet, a newborn clutched to his chest. He was a stranger, a fugitive with the dust of a long run in his clothes and ghosts in his eyes. 10 minutes later, the sheriff arrived with rifles asking if she'd seen a man named Colt. In that moment, Nora, a woman who trusted no one, made a choice that would change everything. She looked the law in the eye and told a lie that would either save 2 lives or cost her own. That night, as the sheriff rode off in a swirl of dust, Nora Wren locked the door, turned back toward the man lying motionless on her floor, and whispered to no one, "Whatever this is, it better be worth it. Rewind." 3 weeks earlier, Nora Wren had ridden into town alone. She always did. She had no husband, no family, no friends she could trust, without checking the wind. First, the world out here didn't make room for women like her. Those who owned land, paid their own way, and made no apologies for either the ranch she kept was small, hard ground, dust, choked cattle, crooked fences. But it was hers after her father died and her brother scattered. Nora ran it with grit in her teeth and a sidearm on her hip. But even grit has limits when the dry season stretched too long, when 3 calves died from heat, and her only ranch hand rode off chasing silver rumors. Nora faced the truth. She couldn't run it alone anymore. So she did what desperate folks did in those times. She posted a letter at the stage stop, wanted capable man to assist in ranch maintenance shelter, provided modest pay, not seeking husband, just help, no drunks, no thieves, no ghosts in North Ridge, 2 miles from Rattlesnake Creek. No answers came for days. Then a reply, it came folded, handwritten in a tight scroll. "No return address. I'm no stranger to work. I don't drink. I don't steal ghosts, though. I reckon they follow me whether I want them to or not. If that ain't disqualifying, I'll be there by month's end." See, the handwriting was lean, almost too clean for a rancher, but something in the tone struck her, honest, wounded, a little bitter. She left the back door unlatched on the 29th day. He didn't come. She forgot about it. Then came the knock, called a Kane. She learned his name only after the fever broke. He came to in her spare room, sunbeams slicing across the wooden floor, the smell of boiled oats drifting from the kitchen. His first words weren't a thank you. They were, "Where's she?" Nora pointed to the crib by the stove where the baby slept, wrapped in one of her late mother's quilts. The child's cheeks were flushed now, eyes fluttering in restless dreams. "She's fine." Nora said she made it. The man stared at the infant like someone seeing a promise they never expected kept. He didn't weep, just nodded once. Then he passed out again in the days that followed. Nora put the pieces together slowly. He never gave more than he had to said. Little ate. Just enough, slept in short bursts, but he worked, repaired a fence without being asked, split wood without instruction, held his daughter with a reverence Nora had never seen from a man. There was no softness in cold Kane. He was made of leather and smoke, but he held that child like she was spun from moonlight, still questions stacked like firewood. Why the fever? Why the fugitive air? And why did the sheriff already know his name? She didn't ask yet, but every day brought her closer to the edge of needing answers, especially after she found the letter. It was tucked inside the lining of the saddlebag, torn at the edges, as if read too many times. Nora didn't mean to snoop, but Kader was still recovering, and the saddlebag had fallen open when she moved it from the porch. It wasn't addressed to him. It was written by him to someone named Eliza. "I know I can't fix it. I know leaving means I lose my claim, my name, my place in this world, but I won't let them sell her. I won't let her become some man's debt. I'll run. I'll hide. I'll cross if I have to. But I won't lose our daughter." Called her. The words were jagged ink, splotched in places where the pen must have trembled that night. Nora stood by the crib longer than usual. The baby stirred once, then settled again. She wasn't sure what kind of storm CER had brought with him, but it was gaining speed, and when it hit, it wouldn't just take him. It had take her two back in town. The sheriff had questions. Why had no one seen Cold in over a year? Why had the Malilan family, powerful ranchers with political teeth, suddenly gone silent about their missing niece and the scandal around her child? Why had a bounty quietly gone up, not for money but for custody? And why had Nora Wren, who always minded her own, suddenly closed her gate and started carrying a rifle? Even to the well answers would come, but not before blood, because ghosts weren't the only ones chasing Cedar, and Nora Wren was about to find out just how far she'd go to protect a man. She didn't trust a child she didn't birth, and a future she never asked for, but could no longer walk away from. By morning, the wind had shifted. The storm passed, but its memory lingered in the mud, in the silence, in the brittle stillness of the air. Clara Ara stood at the threshold of her ranch house, a coffee cup in hand, watching as the first weak strands of daylight spilled over the scrub hills and glinted off the broken fence post near the barn. Her breath fogged the air inside. The baby had begun to cry. The man hadn't stirred much through the night. She'd left him stretched on a makeshift bed near the stove, wrapped in quilts and fever-drenched silence, his muscles locked in exhaustion and his brow furrowed with whatever shadows chased him. In sleep, the baby, swaddled tightly in one of Clara Ara's old flannel shirts, had nursed greedily from a bottle she'd fashioned from a whiskey flask and a carved-down cork. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. She'd fed calves rougher than this. That part came natural by the time he finally opened his eyes. The sun was well up. Clara Ara had just finished mending a split seam on the feed sack when she heard him shift behind her, a rustle of cloth. A sudden grunt. She turned slowly, setting the needle down, watching him through the same calm, unreadable eyes she'd given the world since her father died. "You're at my ranch," she said, before he could speak. "You collapsed at the front door, near froze solid with that child in your arms. I brought you in, fed you, saved your baby." The man's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Name's Colt." He swallowed thickly, his gaze finding the bundle on the table. "His name's Isaac." Clara Ara didn't nod, didn't soften. She was good at masking whatever she felt. "You got anyone looking for you, Colt?" "No, you lawless." He looked away for a moment, then shook his head. "Just tired, just needed a place to fall." Clara Ara studied him, reading between the twitches of his jaw, the lines under his eyes, the way his hands rested like they had once known how to fight, but hadn't thrown a punch in too long. He was lean, half-starved, with a coat that had seen more road than rest, and boots that looked borrowed from a better life. But the baby Isaac was clean wrapped, cared for. He protected him with every shred of what little he had left. "You're lucky I was in a charitable mood," she said, walking to the stove and pouring him a mug of hot water. "You need food, heat, a place to stay, then you earn it." Colt sat up slowly, wincing as his shoulder caught the light wrong. A deep bruise ran across his collarbone, half visible beneath the torn shirt. "I'll work," he muttered. "Ain't afraid of it." "You'll do more than work," she said, sliding the cup across the table. "You'll pull your weight, you'll feed that boy, you'll help with this land, and you'll keep whatever past you're running from out of my house." Colt nodded once. Deal over the next 2 weeks, he became part of the ranch's rhythm. He fed the goats at dawn, helped repair the eastern fence line where coyotes had dug through hauled water from the spring until his arms shook. Clara Ara watched him closely, saying little but noting everything, the way he moved like a man used to watching his back, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way he cradled Isaac in the evenings with a softness that didn't match the rest of him. There was a moment, one morning just before sunrise, when she caught him outside, holding the baby to his chest, wrapped in a thick blanket, both of them staring at the horizon as if expecting something terrible to come crawling over it. He didn't know she was watching. That was the first time she saw the truth in him. Not the fear, but the guilt. It clung to him heavier than any outlaw brand. He didn't speak much about where he came from when she pressed. He'd deflect, "Had a ranch once," he'd say, "west of here. Couple miles out past Cotton Ridge, gone." Now how she asked, "Once fire," he said, and left it at that, but the town spoke more freely than he did. Word got around Dry Pine that Colt Avery, former cattleman, had once been rich in land and debt, a like rumor was. He'd mortgaged everything after his wife took ill land, herd homestead trying to pay for a cure. She didn't live long enough to receive some, said he let it all burn out of madness. Others said it wasn't fire that took the ranch, but men sent by the bank who wanted to make an example out of him. Either way, he was ruined. The law never proved anything, but the whispers followed him like a hound to blood. Clara Ara didn't listen to whispers. She watched actions, and Colt's actions, slow and steady, were beginning to shift something inside her one day. During a particularly hard freeze, Clara Ara collapsed. While tending to a stubborn hinge on the barn gate, her breath had fogged thick. Her gloves worn thin, her knees buckled without warning. Colt found her crumpled in the hay face, white fingers blue. He carried her inside like she weighed nothing, stoked the stove, fed her broth with shaking hands when her eyes fluttered open. Hours later, she found herself wrapped in every quilt he could find, with Isaac asleep at her feet, and Colt crouched nearby, staring at the fire like it owed him something. "You should have called for me," he said quietly, not looking at her. "You were with the baby, I'd have chosen you." His voice broke on the last word, and Clara Ara, strong-willed Clara Ara, who hadn't let anyone choose her in years, who hadn't cried since her mother died during a dust-choked spring, felt something ache deep in her chest. She looked at him, then truly looked, and saw the man beneath the brokenness. He wasn't just surviving. He was trying to rebuild something with hands still bleeding from the last ruin. But secrets don't stay buried on dry soil that spring. A man rode up from the south, dressed fine, smelling like banker's ink and cigar smoke. He dismounted with a sneer and asked for Colt by name. "You owe the man," said, flipping open a folded ledger. 3,000 plus interest. Clara Ara stood beside Colt arms. "Crossed, he works for me. He earns what he eats. You want money, you ride elsewhere." The man sneered. "He's hiding, always been hiding, from debt, from truth, from what he did." Colt didn't flinch. "What I did was try to save her. I lost everything doing it. You want blood now. You'll have to take mine." The banker laughed and spat. "Maybe I will when the dust cleared." Clara Ara made it clear no debt collector, no lawman, no ghost from Colt's past would touch the ranch as long as she drew breath. That land, that house had become more than shelter. It was sanctuary. And if Colt's road ended here, it had ended with him holding a hammer, not a gun, still late at night. When the wind howled low and the fire cracked, soft Colt would sometimes stare into the shadows with a look Clara Ara couldn't name. It wasn't fear, it was something else, regret maybe, but more than that, hope. For the first time in years, he had something to lose again, and that changed everything. The earth began to thaw before the air did. That early spring hush hung over Clara Ara's ranch, like breath waiting to be exhaled. Faint green whispered along the roots of last year's dead stalks, and the ground, once stubborn with frost, turned pliable again beneath the soles of hard-working boots, and with the softening came the inevitable. The land began to ask more from them. Repairs, fencing, tilling, herd rotation. Clara Ara had seen many seasons come and go, but never one like this, not one where she wasn't completely alone. Colt rose each morning before dawn. He would build the fire, boil water, and prepare a breakfast that was never quite perfect, but always hot. Isaac, now nearly 3 months old, had started smiling just barely, just enough, and that baby's coos would echo faintly through the rafters, while Colt rocked him with one foot and sharpened tools with steady hands. Clara Ara didn't say much during those mornings. She'd sit at the table in her usual spot, sipping coffee with her sleeves rolled up and her braids still damp from a basin rinse. She watched them in silence. The man and the child, like she'd stumbled upon something not meant for her and didn't want to frighten it off. But warmth breeds questions, and spring. Thor always reveals what winter berries that came to a head one morning when Clara Ara stepped out to the barn and found Colt standing beside a broken wagon wheel, breathing hard. The wheel itself had snapped clean through from age, but it wasn't the wood that troubled him. It was the letter in his hand, a thin yellowed envelope with a wax seal, opened, but unread. His fingers trembled like they weren't used to holding anything so light. "What is it?" Clara Ara asked. Approaching with caution, he looked up at her guilt etched into every tired line of his face. "It's from her family," he said quietly. "Isaac's mother's kin haven't spoken to them in over a year, didn't even know they knew he was born." Clara Ara glanced at the letter but didn't reach for it. "What do they want?" He exhaled through his nose. "They want him. They say I'm not fit, that I disgraced her memory, that I abandoned everything she loved, their threatening court." Clara Ara's back straightened. "On what grounds?" Colt shook his head. The anger slow burning but clear. "Now they're rich, that's all the grounds they need. She was the last daughter in a long line of landowners. They hated me from the start. I was a cattleman with more charm than coins. She married me anyway, and now they want to strip you of your son." He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. Like stone, Clara Ara studied him for a long time, then reached out and took the letter. She folded it once slowly, then tucked it into her apron pocket. "They'll have to get through me first." She said there were things Clara Ara didn't admit easily. Not even to herself, that she liked the sound of Colt's boots on the floorboards, that she caught herself smiling when Isaac reached for her finger, that she felt a little more whole, a little less ghost when she shared morning chores with someone who didn't treat her land like a burden. But liking was dangerous. Trust was worse. Clara Ara had grown up watching people make promises. They couldn't keep her father. May he rest used to say, "Never bet your life on someone else's word, bet it on how they treat animals, how they mend fences, how they face their worst day." And if that was the measure Colt was holding steady, he still hadn't told her everything, not even close. But what he gave without complaint, without pride. One afternoon while fencing, Clara Ara finally pressed him again. The sun was sharp sky-wide, and the dry rattle of wind through the cottonwoods masked most of the hesitation in her voice. "What really happened to your ranch, Colt?" He didn't speak for a long while, just twisted the wire. Tight, hammered, a staple stepped back. "I owed too much," he finally said. "Not just to the bank, to a man dangerous. One took a loan after my wife got sick, thought I'd have time to pay it back, didn't." "What kind of man?" "The kind that doesn't use a pen when he collects." Clara Ara's stomach tightened. "What happened?" Colt turned eyes dark with a kind of haunted heat she hadn't seen before one night. "I came home to find the barn torched, the house ransacked. My wife. She died days later. Not from the fire. From the grief. Isaac was born a month after, too early. I ran with him the day they came to take the land. Burned. What was left, not out of madness, out of defiance. If I couldn't have it, they wouldn't either." Clara Ara nodded slowly, throat tight. She didn't speak. "But you should know," Colt added, looking her full in the face. "I didn't kill anyone. People talk like I'm some outlaw on the run. I ain't. I'm just a man who ran out of places to hide, and she believed him. Not because of his words, but because of the silence after the way it rang like truth. That night, she brought him a bowl of stew by the fire and said, 'This house could use some repairs come summer, porch, roof sagging, shed, door sticks.'" He looked at her, brows raised. "You asking me to stay? I'm telling you there's work here if you want it." Colt looked at Isaac, then at her, then nodded. "Once we'll stay, but peace doesn't ride alone in the West. A week." Later, two men in town began asking around about a rancher with a baby. Clara Ara heard it from young Esther Price, whose P ran the feed store, said they were looking for a debtor named Avery. Esther said wore suits, but not the kind that come from banks. One of them had a scar across his jaw. Other carried a pistol too comfortable, like Clara Ara thanked her, then saddled up without a word and rode straight home. By the time she arrived, Colt had already seen them. They'd ridden by once, slow peering down the drive like vultures picking out their meat. Isaac had been inside asleep. Colt had been chopping firewood but kept a rifle nearby. He didn't aim it, but he'd rested a hand on the stock. "They didn't stop?" Clara Ara asked. "No, not yet." She took the axe from him and set it aside. "They're not here for money," she said. "They're here to remind you who holds the whip." "I know, and what are we going to do about it?" He glanced down at Isaac still sleeping near the stove in the shade of a quilted corner, then looked up with quiet conviction. We fight like hell. But smart spring leaned into early summer. Clara began training the horse she'd raised from a foe, teaching it to haul and saddle. Both Colt rebuilt the chicken coop with fresh planks. Isaac's giggles rang out more often. They lived not in fear, but in preparation. One morning, Clara Ara handed Colt a document. "What's this land deed in both our names?" He stared at her. "If they come for you, they'll have to come through me. And if they come for me, you'll be the one they find standing on this land. I'm not doing this halfway." Colt folded the paper carefully. "You trust me that much? I trust what I've seen, and I trust myself." He nodded once. "Then I reckon it's time I start trusting me, too." When the letter came, the paper was folded too cleanly and the ink bled too red. Clara Ara had just finished bottle-feeding a lamb abandoned by its mother when she saw it nailed to the post by her gate. No envelope, just a flat sheet of thick parchment pierced by a bone-handled knife. No signature, no seal. The wind tugged at its edges, making it flick like a snake's tongue as she pulled it loose. "Your house is built on another man's debt. We come to collect in 3 days. If the debtor isn't surrendered, we take what's owed." Beneath the words was a sigil etched in wax, a serpent swallowing a feather. Clara Ara stood with it clenched in her fist, the breeze tugging her braid, as if nature itself waited to see her response. She didn't scream, didn't storm into the house. She folded the letter with the same precision its sender had used, walked inside, and laid it on the table before Colt, who was rocking Isaac gently with his heel while mending a torn bridle. He read it once then, once again. Slower. "I told you this might happen." He said, "You didn't tell me they were organized." They weren't. Not at first, just a few men working for a lone shark with too many weapons and too little conscience. But since I disappeared, I guess they found a way to keep feeding themselves a name, a symbol that's new. Clara Ara poured coffee, then leaned against the sink. Arms crossed her stare, pinned to the letter like a hawk waiting for its prey to twitch. "You owe this man." Colt looked up. "I owed him 3 years ago. The debt was paid in blood and fire. But men like that, men who build thrones out of other people's losses, don't let go. They just rename what's owed interest vengeance principle. You're not giving yourself up," she said flatly. His jaw shifted, uncertain. "No," she repeated. "We've buried too much to start digging our own graves." Isaac gurgled in his sleep. The old kettle whistled low on the stove. The world seemed to narrow down to that moment. One of those quiet, sacred points where a person makes a decision they won't come back from. Colt stood, walked over, and gently took the letter from her hand. Then he dropped it into the fire. "If they want me," he said, "they'll have to step onto this land and earn the ground they're standing on." The first day passed with a silence that was too deliberate. No riders, no dust trails, just the ordinary labor of the land stretching thin across their nerves like a skin over boiling water by nightfall. Clara Ara had moved her father's old rifle from the attic to the front parlor, not for show for reach. Colt checked every window latch twice, then parked the wagon crosswise behind the barn as a potential barrier. The house became a single candle-lit pulse in the vast dark plain, not hiding, just holding its breath. Isaac, unaware of the storm circling the perimeter of his world, slept soundly against Colt's chest. He was swaddled in the same quilt Clara Ara had once used as a girl, patched and stained by years of living, but warm and loyal. The boy's tiny hand curled into the fabric of Colt's shirt, and the man didn't flinch. He simply leaned against the doorway, swaying slightly, the baby's breath hot against his collarbone. "Where will they come from?" Clara Ara asked him. "South. Most likely there's an ayoyo that curves around the old cattle trail, easy to cross if you know it, should we send Isaac somewhere. No, if he leaves now, we look scared." Besides, Colt hesitated, looking down. "He's safe with us, safer than anywhere else." Clara Ara didn't ask how he knew. She saw it in the way he held the boy, as if holding the only thing in the world that had never asked anything of him. But love the second day brought dust on the southern horizon. Clara spotted it first through her scope, a faint thread rising from beyond the ridge twisting in a slow spiral. She tracked it until she could make out shapes, 3 riders not galloping, not charging, just floating closer, slow and patient, like wolves testing the edge of a campfire. "They're scouting," Colt said, "trying to see if we flinch." Clara didn't blink. "We don't." When the riders reached the outer fence, they stopped. One man dismounted, walked to the post, and hung another letter on the wire with a length of rawhide. Then they turned and rode back the way they'd come. Clara retrieved the letter and opened it at the kitchen table. No threats this time, no bravado. "You have 1 more day after that. We collect with interest." Colt laughed once, bitter and low. "They think this is a business." Clara read it again. "Then we make it a bad investment that night." Clara opened the trap door under the pantry. The cellar hadn't been touched in months, just a dry place for root vegetables and pickling jars, but now she swept it clean, laid down old quilts, and added fresh lanterns. If things went bad, Isaac would stay down here. Colt reinforced the door with a double bolt. Clara strung a bell system across the porch. They didn't speak much that evening, just moved in practiced harmony, the kind of silence shared by people who have made their peace with the worst and are choosing to fight for the best anyway. At one point, Clara found herself watching Colt as he held Isaac again, singing something faintly under his breath. The tune was lullaby soft, a melody shaped by memory and grief and the kind of stubborn hope that doesn't need witnesses to stay alive. She sat beside him. "You're different now." He didn't look. "Up how? So you're not running?" He smiled faintly, still watching Isaac. "Maybe I found something worth standing still for." Dawn came hard and gray. They were ready. Clara had 1 rifle and a pistol tucked beneath her coat. Colt had the repeater slung over his shoulder and his father's hunting knife strapped to his boot. Isaac slept swaddled in the cellar safe behind 2 locks, and the weight of their resolve. The first shot came before noon, a warning. It struck the roof edge, shattering a clay shingle into dust. Clara didn't flinch. She tracked the shots. Echo! And spotted the muzzle flash from the far edge of the IOYO. "They've split up," she muttered. "At least 2 flanks?" Colt nodded. "You take east window, I'll cover the back." It wasn't a siege. It was a test. The men didn't want a fight. They wanted surrender. They circled, fired twice more, called out in vague threats, but Clara never showed her face. Neither did Colt. They let the silence answer. By sundown, the men had drawn closer. One stepped out near the barn, careless, thinking the sun behind him made him invisible. He fired again. That was his mistake. Colt's shot cracked like a tree split in lightning. The man dropped shoulder, hit yelling in pain. The other 2 froze. "Next one's to kill!" Colt shouted. The wind carried his voice farther than the bullets ever could. The 2 remaining riders turned, cursing, and rode off hard. Colt didn't follow, just watched until the dust trailed into the horizon. By midnight, it was over. No one returned. Clara came down into the cellar to find Isaac still asleep, a soft snore barely lifting his chest. Colt sat nearby, head bowed. She slid in beside him, the air still heavy with smoke and dust. "We're not safe yet," he said. "No," she agreed, "but we're safer." He looked at her, then really looked. "You didn't have to do this, none of it." "Yes," she said simply. "I did." Colt swallowed hard. "Then, I reckon I owe you everything." "No," Clara whispered. "You owe it to him. Raise him right. Stay, don't run." He took her hand. Then it was the first time, not as a thank you, not out of desperation. Just quietly, like the world had finally stopped spinning long enough for him to reach for something real. "I will," he said. And she believed him. 3 days passed, and not a single rider crossed the edge of Clara's land. The wounded man hadn't been found, not as far as Colt could tell, but something had changed. The air wasn't relieved, it was quieter. Yes, but not settled like dust. After hooves had pounded through still hanging mid-air, waiting to drift, Colt spent those days watching the horizon, as much as he worked. The land he split logs with one hand and held Isaac in the crook of his other arm. He fitted a new gate hinge in silence, only the creak of metal and the baby's occasional coos for company. He carried the boy to the chicken coop to the barn, to the creek where he scooped water and let Isaac's tiny fingers reach for it. Fascinated, he didn't talk much, but Clara Ara could tell when a man was listening inwardly to old ghosts, to choices he hadn't forgiven himself for. Yet Clara Ara, too, had settled into something new. Not peace, not yet, but maybe something better. Resolve, the kind of rhythm that comes from planting seeds after a long drought. You don't know if the clouds will return, but your hands move anyway because that's the only way anything grows. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It breathed on the fourth day. Clara Ara found him on the porch just after dusk. Isaac in his arms, both their eyes caught by the pink hush of the dying sun. "He's not yours to carry alone," she said. "Colt didn't turn. He's the only good I ever made." Clara Ara stepped up beside him, then let him make something good out of you that hit him harder than gunfire. He nodded once his jaw set, like he needed to chew the idea before he swallowed it. "I buried her myself," he said after a moment. "Who Isaac's mother?" My wife Clara Ara leaned against the railing. "She didn't press, just waited. She died giving birth. We were on the trail north, running from everything I owed. She'd gone quiet 2 days before. I thought it was the cold, or that she was just tired of riding with no food and no hope. Then that morning the contractions came, and it was too early. There was no help. No doctor, just me and a horse blanket." He finally looked at her. She didn't even scream. Just kept whispering his name, Isaac, like she'd known him forever. He exhaled slowly, a man dragging up his own grave with every word when she passed. I wrapped him in her shawl and walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked for 2 days. I'd been shot once the wound reopened. I lost too much blood. Didn't care. Clara Ara didn't speak. She stepped forward and reached to take Isaac, pressing the boy close. The smell of wild grass and milk still clinging to him. "He doesn't carry your sins?" Colt blinked fast. "I know then, why do you keep leaving them on his shoulders?" The question hung between them like a bell still ringing. Then she left him there on the porch and took the child inside. It rained the next day, first time in 6 weeks, the kind of slow, steady rain that softens everything it touches and makes even old bones feel like they've still got work left in them. They stayed mostly inside, drying boots and scraping mud off the porch planks. Isaac stared wide-eyed at the droplets crawling down the windows. Clara Ara baked bread. Colt mended Isaac's cradle. It was during that long, rain-soaked afternoon that she found the letter Colt had been writing. It wasn't hidden, just folded and left under the lantern on the mantel. She opened it because it had no name on it, and something about the wear in the folds told her it had been written more than once. Clara Ara, I didn't come here to live. I came here to die quietly. I'd made too many mistakes, owed too many people, too much. I had nothing left except a boy who never got to know the sound of his mother's voice when I collapsed on your porch. I thought maybe it was the end I deserved. But you didn't treat me like a man bleeding out. You treated me like a man who still had something to offer. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if the men who are hunting me are done. But I know this, if you'll let me, I want to build something here. Not just fences and roads. I want to build a life. I want Isaac to grow up on land that doesn't run red with other men's choices, and I want you to know that you didn't just take us in, you resurrected something I thought was gone. Hope she didn't say anything about it. She folded the letter, slid it into the seam of the mantelboard, and left it there. Sometimes love was a thing not spoken of at all, just carried that night. Clara Ara woke to Isaac's crying, not the usual fussing, but a sharp, urgent sound. She got up instantly, and Colt met her in the hallway, rifle in hand, his expression unreadable. They both froze. The window in the front parlor was open. Wind moved the curtains, but that wasn't what had set Isaac off outside. A silhouette stood at the edge of the porch, just past the reach of the lamplight. Clara Ara could see the man's coat, heavy and dark, dripping with rain. He didn't call out, didn't move, just stood like a question waiting to be answered. Colt eased forward, rifle ready, but not aimed. "Who are you?" He called. The man raised a hand. "I'm not here to collect." Colt didn't lower the rifle. "Then why are you here?" "I came to warn you now." Colt stepped outside, rain plastering his shirt to his skin. Clara Ara moved toward the doorway, keeping Isaac wrapped close. The man removed his hat, revealing a face Clara Ara didn't recognize, older, scarred with eyes that had seen too many things. "I used to ride with them," he said. "The ones after you." Colt was silent. "They're not coming back for a standoff." The man went on. "They're coming with fire. 2 weeks from now, they're recruiting 30 men, maybe more. They don't care about your debt anymore. They want your land. They want your story to end." Colt stepped down one stair. "Why are you telling me this?" The man's expression cracked. "Because once before the blood and the hate we rode together, and I don't want to see a child burned because I didn't speak when I could." He dropped something, an old brass token etched with a crooked V, onto the porch. Then he walked away into the night. Colt stood there for a long while before coming back in. "They'll be back," he said. Clara Ara didn't ask how many, she just nodded. "We've got 2 weeks?" She said. He looked at her. "To do what?" "To make sure this land remembers who built it." The preparations started before dawn. The next morning, Colt rode into the nearest town, not to run, but to call in a debt of his own. He visited the blacksmith, the farrier, the widow who kept a wagon depot. He spoke quietly but firmly, and left no room for refusal. Meanwhile, Clara Ara worked the fields with a rhythm that hadn't been seen on that land in years. She reinforced the root cellar. She taught Colt how to use her father's traps. She planted signs at the edge of the property that didn't say "keep out," but carried a meaning, all their own barbed wire and thorn brush and hawks tethered to the gateposts. They were building a fortress, not of stone or steel, but of memory, of will, of 2 people who had decided that hope wasn't something given. It was built, fought for, defended, and Isaac, oblivious to the firestorm being held at bay in his name, learned to crawl. He crossed the wooden floor one day. Little hands slapping gums, giggling, and Clara Ara watched him with tears she didn't try to hide. Because in that moment she saw what they were fighting for. Not survival, not revenge, a future. The land began to remember its purpose for years. It had sat quiet, half forgotten, choked by weeds and held together by old bones and weathered wood. But now it stirred. Fences were patched and braced. The barn was reinforced from within, its support beams hammered into place by calloused hands that worked without rest. Buckets, troughs, barrels, anything that could carry water or food was filled and covered. And inside the house, Clara Ara stitched with fingers stiff from years of ranch work, repairing old curtains to black out windows, hemming rough linen to wrap and bind. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. The way she moved told Colt all he had to know. She was ready, not just to defend the house, but to claim it again. This wasn't just survival. This was hers, and she wasn't letting go. Colt, for his part, looked less like the ragged man who had collapsed at her doorstep weeks ago, and more like the figure who once commanded fear across half a territory, not in his voice, which remained low and careful, but in his presence. There was something about the way he walked, now measured, alert, like every step was weighed against consequence. He no longer avoided the long silences between them. He filled them with work, sweat, and small kindnesses. A door held open, a bowl of stew brought to her hands without asking, Isaac's blanket warmed by the fire before bedtime. These weren't the acts of a man trying to make up for sins. They were the quiet offerings of someone who had finally begun to believe he deserved to stay. The days passed in sharpened routine. Each sunrise brought new repairs, new drills, new layouts. Clara Ara studied her father's old maps by lamplight, showing Colt the lay of the ravines. The soft soil where wagon wheels would bog down the dry creek bed that could be used as a false trail. She marked it all out with stones, showed him the choke points and covered blind spots. He listened, not just with ears, but with the full weight of his body. He wasn't used to being the student, but he knew when to follow. They built a system, not a fortress. They weren't soldiers. They were two worn-down people with a child and a line in the sand, so they used what they had: ropes rigged to gates, broken glass buried just beneath windowsills, feed bags soaked and stacked to absorb fire, clareira, even buried tins of lamp oil beneath the porch, wrapped in wet canvas. Just in case the worst came, there would be no running. No last-minute escape if they came. They'd come hard, and this house, this baby, this fragile, cobbled-together family would be the wall they broke against. But not all preparations were physical each evening. As the sun dyed red behind the bees, they sat together. Colt held Isaac while Clareira read from the tattered book of Psalms, her voice soft, her eyes never. Leaving the page, she didn't ask if he believed, didn't ask if the words meant anything. But the child quieted and Colt listened. That was enough. One night after Isaac had drifted to sleep in his cradle, Colt stayed on the porch long after Clareira had gone to bed. The moon hung heavy and low, silvering the fields and painting the barn. In ghost, he sat with a rifle across his lap, not out of fear but as a companion, something familiar to rest his thoughts against. He spoke aloud. Not loudly, just enough for the night to carry it. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, "but I know I might have to become him again. Just once his hands slid down the barrel of the rifle. Just once more." He stayed there until the cold soaked into his bones and the coyotes stopped crying in the hills. Then the day came. A stillness arrived that morning like a held breath. The clouds didn't move. The horses didn't stir. Even the chickens seemed to sense something. Clareira noticed it when she opened the door to feed them, how the air felt taut, stretched thin, like something about to snap. She met Colt's eyes across the yard. He nodded. It was time he led the mare into the barn, fastened the side gate shut, then covered the west-facing windows with the last of the old feed sacks. Clareira, meanwhile, secured Isaac's crib in the root cellar, surrounded it with blankets, water, food, and a small oil lantern. She lit it carefully, whispering to the baby as she swaddled him close. "Stay quiet, my darling, stay safe, we'll come back for you soon." She kissed his forehead, and for a moment her hands trembled, but she steadied them not by force but by love. Love had given her strength when nothing else would. Then she climbed out, sealed the door behind her, and walked into the house where Colt was waiting. "I'll cover the front," he said. "I'll take the kitchen window." No more was said. It had all been decided. They drilled, practiced, run it over in their heads a dozen times. They knew each blind spot, each fallback point. They knew how many steps it took from the door to the west wall, how long it took to reload, how far a voice would carry. By noon, the sound arrived, a low, rhythmic pounding from the west hooves. Colt looked out. His face didn't change. 6 riders, not 30, but each one carried a torch. Each one was armed. The man at the center wore a red scarf around his neck, not for warmth, for war. He was smiling. They didn't charge immediately. They rode up slow. Theatrical, like they were riding into a performance. They'd already rehearsed. Colt opened the front door and stepped out. "Didn't think you'd be here to greet us," the leader called. "Figured you'd keep running. I've run enough." The man nodded. "That's true. You have, but the thing about debt, Colt, is it never gets lighter, just older." Colt didn't respond. He just stood, the rifle hanging loose in his hand. The leader gestured. 2 men peeled off and circled to the sides. One drew his pistol and aimed at the barn. Another moved toward the corral. "You got a woman in there." "No, you got a child." Colt said nothing. The man smiled wider. "Liar." The first torch landed against the side of the barn. Flames sputtered, then caught the dry hay inside, hissed like a snake, then roared. Colt didn't flinch, but inside the house Clareira moved. She slipped through the kitchen like a shadow, sliding the bolt on the rear door and dropping into the trench. They dug weeks before it led around the side of the house and gave her a clear view of the rider near the corral. She fired once the man dropped. The rest spun instantly, shouting. Guns barked, windows shattered. Colt dove sideways, rolling behind the old water trough. Bullets sparked off the porch posts. The barn groaned behind him, flames licking up its walls. Clareira popped up behind the chicken coop, took a second shot, then dropped again, her cover held. The third shot rang out, clipped the leg of one rider who toppled off his horse screaming. The others panicked. One tried to light another torch, but dropped it. The flames caught on his saddle blanket. He shrieked, battered at it, and galloped off blindly into the brush. Colt moved then low and fast. He got to the porch, kicked the rifle up into his hand, and leveled it at the leader. "Call it off," he growled. The man raised his gun Colt, fired first. The leader fell backwards off his horse, his red scarf soaked black. The last rider looked around, saw 3 of his men dead, 2 gone, 1 on fire. He turned and ran. Silence returned, broken only by the crackling of the barn. They spent the rest of the day putting out the fire. The barn was damaged, but not destroyed. The horses, spooked, but safe. Isaac was quiet in the cellar. Untouched Clara Ara wept when she saw him still breathing. That night, Colt dug 6 graves even for the ones who hadn't deserved one. Clara Ara didn't help. She held Isaac. She waited when it was done. Colt sat down on the porch steps, covered in soot and dirt, and looked at her. "I was ready to die." He said I wasn't. She replied, "Not anymore." He looked down. "I didn't know I could live like this." Clara Ara sat beside him, Isaac asleep in her arms. "Well," she said, "now you do." They sat that way until the stars came out. The graves settled quiet beneath the bluff. 6 fresh mounds with nothing to mark them but rocks and dry grass. The wind carried no judgment for the dead, only silence. Clara Ara stood a while at the edge of the hill, her arms folded across her chest, Isaac resting in the sling wrapped around her shoulder, the baby's head nestled against her collarbone. Breathing softly. She wasn't crying. There was no mourning for the men buried down below. But still, she stayed long enough for the breeze to dry the sweat on her brow, long enough to honor the fire and blood that had nearly taken everything behind her. The ranch creaked in the wind. Smoke drifted in a soft column from the rebuilt chimney. The barn still stood, blackened but functional. The ground was scorched in places, but there were no more boot prints on her land, no men with guns, no shouts echoing from the trees for the first time in weeks. The valley was still not with fear, but peace. Colt didn't say much in. The days that followed, he worked harder than before, if that was even possible. The barn roof was patched with salvaged shingles and reinforced from inside with fresh beams. He cut himself. The chicken coop was expanded, the fences were walked and tightened. Even the west gate, the one Clara Ara had left open since her father's death, was repaired and shut for good. It wasn't just labor, it was atonement, but not the kind he expected to finish. There was no done to what he was doing. He was building something that wouldn't be complete in his lifetime, a kind of permanence. The only apology that ever really meant anything. Clara Ara noticed the way he handled Isaac now. Not with hesitation, but reverence. Not as if the boy would break, but as if Colt might. He held him at night sometimes, long after Clara Ara had gone to bed, sitting by the fire, whispering things she couldn't hear. She never asked what was said. Some truths were between a man and the child. He'd nearly failed. He was the last of Colt's blood and the first to know him clean. They never spoke again of the fire or the men who had come for him. There were no questions about the old world he came from. It had burned, same as the corner of the barn. What remained was ash and memory. But in spring, Clara Ara found something unexpected beneath the floorboards of the bunkhouse. She'd been cleaning out the last of the old storage space, kicking through mouse nests and broken crates when her boot struck something hollow. She pried it loose, a cedar box with iron latches stained from years of dust and rain. She opened it. Inside, stacks of bills wrapped tight in twine, a ledger book with careful handwriting, and a pistol wrapped in cloth. She brought it to Colt. He didn't look surprised. "I thought I'd buried that." He said quietly, "You did?" He nodded slowly. "That was before." Clara Ara lifted the ledger. "You kept records. I owed a man. I paid my way out with blood the last job. I didn't take it. That's when they came. I still had the money." She ran her finger down the spine of the book, closed it, and returned it to the box. "Then it's yours." Colt looked at her. "No. Not anymore. Clara stared at him, then out the window where the orchard had just begun to bud tiny white blossoms blinking open in the wind. "You're not that man anymore," she said. He didn't answer. She set the box beside the hearth and left it there untouched from that point on. The season changed in earnest. The rains came late but strong. The grass returned softer, greener than in years. Colts were born in the corral. Wild birds nested in the barn's beams. Clara took to singing again. Quiet, rough-voiced hymns as she worked the garden or washed the baby's clothes. Neighbors began to return, too. Word had spread about the attack and about the man who drove the riders off with nothing but a rifle and his wife's old maps. There were no medals, but there was respect. When the Parker family passed through on their way to Fort Stanton, they brought seed when old Lester from across the basin stopped by with a wagon wheel to mend. He didn't ask about Colt's past, just offered his tools and a knowing nod in time. Even the sheriff rode out to the homestead. He didn't dismount, just sat atop his horse and lifted his hat in the sun. "Quiet place again," he said. "Best kind," Clara answered. He looked to Colt, standing behind her with Isaac on his hip. "You planning to stay?" "I am the sheriff." Nodded. "Then you keep it quiet." You hear Colt nodded back. The sheriff turned and rode off without another word. It was a summer morning late July when Isaac took his first steps. Colt was splitting wood near the barn. When Clara shouted from the porch, he dropped the axe and ran there on the rough boards of the porch. The child stumbled forward 2 steps, then 3 into his mother's arms. His face was alight, not with understanding, but joy. The joy of a beginning. Colt stood frozen. Clara turned, eyes shining. "He's walking." Colt stepped forward, dropped to his knees. "Come on," he whispered, opening his arms. Isaac looked uncertain, then slowly, clumsily, he walked 4 steps, wobble, catch, 5 steps, laughter 6 into his father's waiting hands. Colt held him close, eyes closed. "He's walking," he said almost to himself. Clara came behind them, wrapped her arms around them both. They stayed that way for a long time. The wind was warm, the grass bent gently in the fields, a hawk circled high overhead. Years passed. Isaac grew with the land, tall, quiet, sharp-eyed like his father. But he laughed like his mother. Open, honest, full. The ranch never became rich, but it became whole fences, stayed mended, crops came regular the well held, and stories about what had happened faded like old scars still there, but no longer raw. Sometimes men passed through looking for someone named Colt, but they always found silence, not denial, just absence. The man they sought had died years ago. The man who remained had a child to raise a field, to plow a porch, to sit on at dusk with a woman who once pulled him from the edge of the world and never let go one evening. Isaac, now 7, climbed onto the porch after feeding the horses. "Ma, yes, darling, is it true? Pa used to be different." Clara glanced at Colt, who was whittling quietly in his chair. She smiled. "No," she said gently. "He's always been your father. That's who he is." Isaac nodded, satisfied. He didn't ask again. That's the end of the story. Please subscribe for more videos.